and we are going to be doing the part 2, which I described as the spicy meatball of syphilis, which is just a wonderful, wonderful visual to me.
Spicy meatballs. Is it oozing fat?
No, pus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I hope none of you are eating. I'm sorry. I used to be a health inspector, so I have literally no eating versus talking about disgusting stuff.
She has
connection.
no barrier. We actually quite frequently end up talking about poop.
Yeah.
Or some disgusting
and it's not an issue for
execretion
me.
of the human body.
Yeah. So if it is an issue for you, I'm sorry. Put the plate away and continue watching because we don't want to lose you.
There are so many fluids that the body can produce in different excretions and stuff. It's crazy.
It's crazy. There's a whole
so
bunch
many
like
chemicals.
that. Yeah, I'll do a segment one day on skin, and it'll be really interesting. There's a lot of secretions there too.
Yeah.
Anyway, no more secretions talk. Hey, is your food gone now? I hope it is. Yes. Anyway, so when you talk about the history of syphilis, which when I first started doing syphilis research, I actually did this first because it was so fascinating. I was going to do the biological stuff first, and then I was like, no, this is amazing. So the history of syphilis is fascinating. It's literally affected thousands of things that we do in modern days. It's just was the creation point for tons and tons and tons of things we have now. So I'm going to get into those. I think it's going to be cool. Yes. So one of the main running theories for syphilis is that it was brought back to the new, to Europe from the New World by Columbus. And
so it was kind of like a giant middle finger to colonization.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of those though, for sure. I mean, there was a lot of things that we brought over there as well from Europe, but there was definitely a lot of things that they gave us back for sure. Not that they got the...
Deservedly so at that time.
Absolutely, yes.
But you can't discover new things if you never look. And they were looking.
Yeah, I guess so. For spices though, which now the English never even use. It's tragic. It's true though, right? Burn. Sorry.
Salt and pepper.
Exactly. Anyway, so it swept through Europe during the 1490s, and it was one of the main driving forces of brothels closing. So that's one of the first things, because the reason that was, this is an obvious thing for anybody who knows any history at all, but the greatest minds got together when this, terrible plague started, sweeping through their
communities. How many people did it
communities.
kill?
Millions and millions and millions.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. So how was it compared to the Black Plague?
I don't know what the difference of
were they
deaths
simultaneous?
was. No.
Oh, okay.
They weren't. No, this was after the
plague.
Okay. Yeah. So because they actually thought it was a new form of plague. Yeah, that was one of the theories. Speaking of religious officials, they often, they were often thought of as the great minds back then, right? They were, and they are great minds now, but they were thought of as, being able to do everything. Yeah. They can cover everything.
Omnipotent.
Third time's a charm. Anyway, so they were thought of as doing everything, be good at everything. So there was scientists, there was, people who theorized about what maybe was causing this horrible great plague that they called it. The Great Plague or the Great Pox was another word they gave it, or the French disease, or they blamed it on whoever they thought they got it from as well, right? Because first thing that everybody wants to know is, who should I blame? That's true now. Yeah,
it's a logical first thing to want to know.
Yeah, it's as true now as it was back then.
Yeah.
Anyway, so some of the things they came up with were is it an astrological conjunction of planets? They're in a specific place, and that's why we have this terrible thing. Punishment by the gods or God.
It's interesting that they always look for outward, but never look. It seemed like they never looked in at trying to look at it until the invention of the microscope.
Exactly, yeah. But we didn't have any way to see it as much, But
even with canker sores,
Chancre sores,
Chancre sores.
Come on. It wasn't until 1905 that the bacteriological cause of it was actually discovered under a microscope. So that's
pretty late in the game. It's 4 decades.
But it's four centuries of not knowing what the heck this thing is.
And they were only able to cure it in around the 1940s when
penicillin was discovered. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we dealt with this forever, where it was just like, we have no idea what's going on. And they've been living in that reality longer than we've been living in our current reality, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
So the other thing that was really interesting about this syphilis epidemic was that it really was the first time that people ever began to question religious authorities, because they actually saw them with the sores on their face, and it was already obvious that it was through sex. So they, like all these churchy guys were like, I'm abstinent, but it was like, clearly you're not, because it's through sex. And so that was one of the first times ever in history that people actually began questioning their the legitimacy
of the church.
Exactly, and how much truth they're living their life in, and all that kind of stuff kind of came up
hilarious.
More. Yeah, because they would have, sores on their face, and it was like, well, obviously you did something. So, I mean, it was, part of the...
That's where maybe the phrase caught red-handed comes from, because you have the sores in your hand.
Oh, maybe! Ooh, I don't know, but that's a cool idea, for sure. Perhaps.
Caught red-handed, though, or red-faced.
Red everything, basically. Anyway, the bacteriological cause is called Treponema pallidum, and... It was actually really interesting because between the time that they, started having this disease in Europe and the time that they actually figured it out, which again, 4 centuries is a pretty long time.
It's a lot of dead people.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, especially when they consider that, a lot of historians have looked into how many people at a time in Europe would have had syphilis, and it's 1 out of 5 were actively infected with syphilis. Yeah, for 4 centuries. Like, that's insane. So in the middle, there was a lot of desperate doctors, and these desperate doctors would do crazy, crazy, crazy things to try and prove that it was something that was communicated from person to person, or that it was because of these lesions specifically. Maybe there was something in the lesion that caused it, or something, grasping onto anything. So this one guy, I think his name was John something. Anyway, some of the theories are that he poked himself. Some of the theories are that he poked somebody else.
Which type of
poke? But he was a doctor. He was a private doctor, and he had a patient with a bunch of those oozing lovely sores. And he put a lancet into the middle of it, pierced the center, and then he pierced himself with it, and he got the disease. And he was really happy that he had proven that,
that is the only person in world history that has been happy they've had syphilis.
That's true. So I wanted to talk more about this Ulrich Dürer fella. So during this time, he was incredibly, he was very, very scared of what was happening around him. And he did a lot of really cool art. He was just seeing this decay and death all around him. So they have the hussy lady, and the man... getting all kind of comfortable with her, and then this death shield thing. So
I just noticed this male for the first time right now, because I thought that was a lot of hair. I thought that was her hair, and a fancy kind of fur piece that she had on.
So this is a fella in the 3rd stage, or the tertiary stage,
when it's in your head.
Syphilis, the neurosyphilitic part of it, and he's just going crazy. And there's a lot of really interesting kind of excerpts that people have gotten from journals, and it's I'm crying while I'm writing this. I'm crying onto the page while I'm writing this, because my hands are just...
Is it so painful?
Yeah, and it's because of that lightning bolt thing that we were talking about before.
The chemically electric spontaneous shock.
Yeah, well, that's what it feels like, at least, right? So I mean, he's going crazy, and he has these just all over his body, these painful things. Probably feel like a really fast Charlie horse.
How do they even sleep?
They probably don't. So
that will kill them fast.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, who knows what actually kills people, right? But so it's really interesting, too, because how we were talking about that guy who kind of lanceted it himself. It was like, that's syphilis. So it kind of, this whole thing actually gave rise to the idea of a private doctor and doctor-patient confidentiality. So one way that it did that is actually in England, in London specifically. They talked about how people would go to the public hospitals. And if they got diagnosed with syphilis, then they'd be publicly beaten in front of the entire town to teach them a lesson. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of people being like, hell no, like I'm not going over there and doing that.
Yeah. So they got doctors into their homes.
Exactly. So they got these private doctors, and then that was what gave rise to, we're giving you a lot of money. These are the only people who can afford private doctors. Yeah. Therefore, you're not going to say anything. Not that it always worked super well, but it was the first time that
as
ever
long as there's
came
been
up.
Newspapers and gossip, people have spilled secrets.
Absolutely, for sure. So it's really interesting to know that, it started, something so base that we have in the Western world now is this idea that your doctor can't go around saying everything that you have to everybody else, right? Yeah. So it's really cool. It actually is the beginning of a lot of rhinoplasties as well. So like plastic surgery kind of came from syphilis.
What's
as well.
rhino?
Rhinoplasties,
it's the nose.
Nose jobs, basically.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. They have this thing called a saddle nose deformation, and it basically makes it so it rots away this part of it, and it collapses your nose. It's called a saddle nose deformation, and that's for people that have congenital syphilis.
So does it happen on ears as well, because they're the same material?
I don't know. All I know is that the saddle nose thing, the reason that they actually invented this fake noses and rhinoplasty and all this stuff, because it was really common back then, is because of congenital syphilis specifically. It's not even from getting
sexually transmitted.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I know. I was like, wow. So there was actually a saying back then. It was called a day in the brothel, lifetime on the mercury, and that was what it meant. They just had to drink mercury chocolate shakes. That was literally a thing.
How did that not just kill them instantly?
Well, it takes a long time for toxicity to build up.
Not if you're swallowing the mercury.
Longer than you think, probably.
Fair enough.
And people's life expectancy was a lot shorter back then too, so it wouldn't have stood out as much. Like, oh my gosh, you died when you were 30, so does everybody else, basically.
That's fair.
Yeah. So another interesting thing that it actually affected was, I know everybody's seen, the court fashion of the lords and ladies back then, and it was these, big puffy white wigs and the,
white
powder stuff and the
lipstick.
the little dots and stuff. That was because of syphilis too, or that's what people say. So, it was to cover up all those nasty oozing sores. Like, you're going to put black stuff on that, obviously.
Because they didn't have anything that was opaque enough to cover it up with normal makeup. So black is the only thing.
Totally.
That's smart. And they put a hair on it to disguise the texture.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, it's started a lot of fashion, and it's interesting because nobody ever, or not usually, people don't think about how diseases have really, really inspired a lot of how we live our lives today. So it's interesting. I wanted to get into some more kind of current history on this. Al Capone was known for having syphilis, actually. So he was a big mobster.
A mobster that was sleeping around.
Well, obviously. Gotta do what mobsters gotta do, right?
That comes with the identity.
It does, really. So he was sentenced to Alcatraz, that island jail in San Francisco that's now an amazing museum. And during his time there, he kind of reverted to being a child. He would talk to God. He would, and not just praying, talking to God, like have conversations. He would, he actually got in a feces fight in his cell, with another inmate, which is why he was actually, he left Alcatraz way earlier than he was supposed to, because he was just nuts. And the guards were like, no more poo fights, okay? I just want to get you out of here. I wouldn't want to deal with it either.
I am so out.
So done with this shit. So,
where did he go after that?
He just went into a nursing home. He died in Florida. Because he wasn't a threat to anybody. He didn't have any brains left. So he was basically having tea parties with nobody by the end of it, is what I've read.
Alice in Wonderland.
Right, exactly. It's interesting, too, because this really ties into recent history as well. So, right now, there's actually a lot more outbreaks of syphilis in the developed world than we have seen in a long, long time. Mm-hmm. So in 2016, the BC CDC actually put out a warning that the rates of syphilis had been higher than they were in 30 years. And so, there's a lot of hypotheses as to why this may be the case.
Yeah.
Is it because people are more promiscuous? Is it because of social media culture where it's just like, I want to hook up, I want to hook up, I want to hook up,
They should have a social media app for going to check for syphilis.
That would be amazing. Exactly.
Like, Tinder sends you a reminder every once in a while, you've been sleeping with too many people, you should get an STI check.
That would be amazing. I think a lot of people would turn that part of the app.
Use an AI to look at your conversation to see if you've met up.
Yeah, exactly. Where did this go? Let's see. Anyway, it's a good idea, how to make dating grosser.
We need all the reasons.
Right, exactly. So it's interesting because that hypothesis doesn't really jive, though. So, there's been an uptick in all STDs across the developed world, but, and probably because of social media culture, let's be honest.
Yeah. Hookup culture.
Hookup culture. Yeah, exactly. That's
not
part
specific
of
to social media.
Right, exactly. But you're right, totally. But it's interesting because a lot of the other STDs have not grown quite as much as syphilis. Syphilis seems to have grown a lot more.
So there's external factors.
Exactly. So one hypothesis that a researcher in
so
BC,
it might not be related to sex at all. Well, you contract it from sex, but the uptick is not as a result of having more.
It is. Part of it is, but there's something on top of that.
But then the other STIs or STDs would have the same amount of increase.
Exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right. So this one has more of an increase. So and that's why they're kind of researching, the connection with having HIV, because one of the hypotheses, and again, I'm not saying that this is true or not false or whatever, it's just interesting. One of the hypotheses to explain this is that maybe people on antiretroviral drugs, which are the drugs that people take to control HIV, people on antiretroviral drugs are getting it more. Yeah. So they're wondering if maybe the antiretroviral drugs make it so that your body isn't as equipped to fight against.
Because it's shutting something off.
Right.
The antiretroviral, hence the anti.
Yeah, that makes it more easily, that makes a person, the host organism, which would be you or me or whatever, more susceptible to that. All right, well, it's been a slice. Thank you very much for, tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, and if you have questions or comments or thoughts or ideas, list them below in the comments.
Yeah,
we'll see you next time.
Bye.